EG Nodes is a clip-based audio unit host with sequencing capabilities to play external instruments, audio units, or MIDI hardware. Press the plus button to open the nodes list. We're going to choose a sequencer node and check its layout. Select the instrument you'd like to add to your project in the audio unit list. The plugin interface will be displayed in the bottom part of the screen. Let's close it and see how the node layout is done. We have the node name and node type here in the top section, the toggle button to enable or disable the node volume and pan, and the solo and mute buttons here. On the left side we have the 8 scenes button, where you can store the node configuration and notes. On the right side we have the instrument slot, and below the effects slots. Tap on it to add an effect to your node. To remove an instrument or an effect, long press on it and confirm the operation. In the top right corner you can find the MIDI configuration for the node, where you can set MIDI in, MIDI out, and the internal routing. And next to it you have the button to expand the node to access to its instrument and effects parameters. To remove a control, simply long press on it. Tap on the node name to open the menu to rename it. Save it into your favorite nodes list. Duplicate the node, delete it, or send MIDI panic to the instrument loaded on the node. Favorite nodes will appear in the node list menu. Here you can swipe left an item to share the node with other devices or users, or remove it from your favorites. Let's add our first node to the project, starting with a note chord node. The instruments list will pop up, and we're gonna add a synthesizer on it. We can switch to the node editor here, or we can tap on the editor preview below the node toggle button. Each node can be enabled or disabled during the playback using the toggle button. When enabled, a node will be in-queued, and it will play at the beginning on the next bar. In the node editor, we can select the root note and the chord to be played, as well as the chord inversion, the speed rate, and the number of bars for the clip. If we switch the node scene, the current settings will be automatically stored, and they will be copied into the new scene if empty. We can now change the node parameters and notes, and they can be recalled using the node scenes previously saved. Let's try now adding a sampler on a note node. We're gonna use the app segments for this. Now I'm gonna load a beat loop into the sampler, and I will set the BPM of my project to match the loop. I can swipe on tempo label, use the arrows for a more precise adjustment, tap tempo on the BPM label, or long press on it to manually insert the tempo value. Segment sample can be triggered by a C1 note. Now let's add an Arpeggiator node and check how it works. We can set the root note, the arpeggio direction, steps, speed rate, bar length and chord inversions. We can also add an effect on it and press the dice button to make nodes choose an arpeggio for us. The sequencer node is ideal to play monophonic melodic lines or bass lines. Let's see how it works with a bass sound. We can set the root note and scale, and the notes will be automatically quantized to the correct musical note. If we want to set a global musical scale for each node in the project, we can do it from the tempo key menu. Now make the clip 2 bars long and add some notes. If we double tap on the measure bar, we can remove all the notes in the bar. We can also drag the first bar on the second one to duplicate it. The sequencer editor has several parameters that can be automated to create more interesting lines. We have note velocity, probability, frequency, randomization, note hold, and an additional controller to create sequences of chords. For each note, we can choose the probability that it will be played and the frequency. We can also decide to get random value for a step to create always unique lines. Let's hear how it sounds with a previously saved drums note. Now let's add a second sequencer node to play a melody with the EGC1 analog synth audio unit. We can use the dice button to auto-create a random melody and adjust it to our taste. Using the chord controller, we can create a chord harmony and, again, set the velocity, probability, frequency, and so on. To play drums, percussion, or rhythmic instruments in general, we can use a rhythm node. EG nodes will automatically detect most of the drum machine apps on iOS and will set the correct MIDI map for it. Usually we have the kick drum on the first row, the snare on the second row, and hi-hat on the third one. Let's start adding some sounds to our beat. We can use the ratchet drop-down to insert triplets. We can now duplicate the bar into a second one and make some changes to our pattern. We can also pinch zoom to add precision to our editing. Now let's work on the frequency and probability to add some originality to the beat. First, we need to select the sound the controller will apply to. Press the controller note button and tap on the second row of the editor. I'm now adding a cymbal on the first step. Now I select the cymbal row holding the controller note button. And I set the frequency to each 2 bars. In this way the cymbal will play alternatively each 2 bars. On the rhythm note we can drag to delete and add notes. We can also set the swing for our beat with the swing slider. Or we can change the speed rate and the number of steps of the beat to get complex and odd time beats. Finally, we can press the dice button to create random pattern for the selected row. Each node can be configured to send and receive MIDI from external controllers or apps installed on your device, to play the node, or record MIDI into a piano roll node. Tap on the MIDI icon in the top right corner of your node to check the MIDI configuration. We can see all the current MIDI sources and destination available on your device. In the section below we have also the list of all the nodes in your project, so that we can set a node to send notes to other nodes. MIDI in and out can be eventually filtered by MIDI channel in the right drop-down menu. MIDI channel will be particularly useful when you need to send multiple nodes to the same MIDI destination. Let's see how the internal routing works. Here we have a sequencer node playing a melody line with the app noise melody. I'm now adding a new instrument node loaded with EG-C1 analog synth. In the MIDI configuration, I can select node 8 as internal destination, so that the node 8 will receive node 6 MIDI notes. To create more complex harmonies and MIDI parts, you can use a piano roll node. We can easily add notes tapping on the editor and change the note length, dragging them from the end. To move and edit multiple notes, we can use the piano roll lasso. To copy selected notes, we can tap and drag from the timeline here. We can also duplicate an entire bar. Deselect notes and again tap and drag from the timeline over the first bar to the second bar here. Double tap on the timeline to completely remove notes in the bar. If we want to remove only some notes, select them and simply tap on them. We have several quantization options that will impact both on manual note insertion than on the MIDI recordings. Or, if we prefer, we can choose to bypass the snap feature. All the clip can be transposed in the range of 2 octaves. That can be handy when we import MIDI files or if we duplicate a piano roll node. The piano roll editor will also allow the import of MIDI files, dragging them from Files app or another files management app. Feature available on iPad only. You can also record MIDI incoming from an external controller. Just open the MIDI config for the node and set your MIDI keyboard as input source. I'm gonna add my X-Key MIDI keyboard. Or you can record the MIDI out from the O3 instrument loaded on the node. Long press the record button to open the recording configuration. I'm now enabling the option to start recording when a MIDI note on is received, and to automatically stop recording when clip end is reached. Now let's try to record from another node, for instance an arpeggio node, using internal routing. Here we are telling the arpeggio node to send its notes to the piano roll node 6. When we start the playback, the piano roll will receive the MIDI input to automatically start the recording. A generative node is a MIDI generator that continuously creates melodies or harmonies mutating in time. We can choose the root key and the scale that we prefer, and change the note frequency too. Here in the detail view, we can see the preview of the generated notes. We can send the generative notes to another node and merge them with the destination node sequencer. A MIDI FX node can host external MIDI generator and MIDI effects audio unit to send MIDI to our nodes or to process incoming MIDI. In the example, we're gonna add Riffer to generate MIDI notes and route them to our instrument nodes. The MIDI FX start, stop, and tempo informations is synced to EG nodes. Now just route the MIDI FX out to an instrument node in my project to play it. Let's try with the MIDI FX now. I'm gonna use Rosetta Arpeggio to process the MIDI coming from a sequencer node. Now I'm gonna route my sequencer MIDI out to the MIDI FX, and the MIDI FX back to my sequencer. With a MIDI FX node, we can also control the parameters of other instruments through control changes. I will use Rosetta LFO to send control changes 13, 15, and 17. I set the node 2 as my MIDI destination. Now I create a slider and XY pad controls, and I use the automap function to assign them to my synth. Here I can set the control change value for my parameters. I'm gonna set the same as my MIDI FX node, so 13, 15, and 17. Each node can save its parameters, toggle button, volume, pan, and notes into one of the 8 available scene. When the project is playing, the in-queued scene will start to play when the next bar will start. On the contrary, if the project is stopped, the scene will switch immediately. Changes to parameters or notes are automatically saved into the scene. If a scene is still empty, it will inherit data from the previous scene. This is a fast way to duplicate a scene and work on it. To copy a scene into another one, select the scene to be copied and then long press on the destination scene. The main scenes buttons here can be used to store a particular configuration of the node's scenes, and it's a fast way to create song structures. For example, we store scene 1 for the node 1 and scene 3 for the node 2 in the main scene 1. Long press on one of the bottom buttons to save the current node's scenes configuration into it. We can expand the node view to access some additional controls for it. Here you can add sliders and XY pads pressing the plus button and control the parameters both for the O instrument, then the O effects loaded on it. The sliders and XY values will be saved into the current scene. To remove a parameter control, long press on it. A prompt with delete confirmation will pop up. Parameters can be automated recording the sliders and XY position. Simply press the Record Automation button and start moving the controls. The automation time will follow the bar length of the note instrument. To change the parameter automation, simply move the control to override it. Another great way to map an audio unit parameter is to directly move the control in the plugin interface. Our controls, a slider and an XY pad, are not yet assigned. When we move a parameter of our synth, the first empty control will be mapped. EG nodes can be used as a standalone groovebox to host external O3 instrument and effects, or can be hosted in other DAW as a MIDI generator audio unit. When hosted, EG nodes cannot load instruments and effects anymore due to iOS audio architecture, but you can use it as a flexible and complete MIDI sequencer to drive the other instruments in your DAW. Let's add 3 nodes to control the instruments loaded in the DAW. I'll start with a saved rhythm node, then an arpeggio, and finally a sequencer node. EG node start-stop is now synced with the DAW. We can set a different MIDI channel for each node, so that the DAW can route the incoming MIDI properly. By default, each node will have an auto-incremental MIDI channel. Now I will route EG nodes to each instrument. Let's do the same for our sequencer node. To control our instrument's parameters, we can expand a node and add a slider or XY pad control. Then we need to choose the control change number and route the message in the Do Instruments settings. Here we are sending CC10 on MIDI channel 2 for the crush parameter of our synth.